Dr. Paul Connett is here. Good evening, Dr. Paul Connett. How are you?
I'm fine, Ian. Thanks very much.
Impressive career, great pedigree. Obviously, you are well versed in the subject, and I think a lot of people, when they hear folks talk about fluoride in the water, they still think of it as kind of like fringe science, like people who are against it. You know, they don't get it. They don't understand, or they're afraid of, they're just sort of paranoid people. And after reading your book, I realized, oh my God, it's really the other way around. The case against fluoride is much stronger than the case to have it be in our water system.
Well, I agree with you. I joined with two other scientists to write this book, James Beck, an MD, PhD from Calgary in Alberta, and Professor Spedding Micklem, a biologist, a PhD from Oxford from Scotland. And the three of us wrote this book. And it's understated rather than overstated. It's relatively easy to read, but everything is well documented. And I must say that 15 years ago, when my wife first asked me to read some material on fluoridation, I was just like most people. I thought the people opposed to fluoridation a little crazy.
Right.
And I didn't want the issue because, that stigmatization that you're Looney Tunes if you talked about it. But as soon as I started reading the literature, I was appalled and rather embarrassed because I'd held that view or that impression. I'd been nurturing that prejudice for many, many years prior to this reading.
Well, fair is fair. I mean, it doesn't really get an airing. It doesn't really get a discussion. There really isn't. I mean, the only thing I ever heard was, like fluoride is obviously good to help us have strong teeth. Put fluoride in the water, more people have strong teeth. End of subject. I mean, that's all you ever really heard about it.
That's right. It's backed up with the commercials. Everybody sees the commercials on television for fluoridated toothpaste. And so, yes, there's millions of impressions have been made. In fact, every time you go to the supermarket, the pharmacy, there it is. All those toothpastes have fluoride in it. So, yes, that and the professional bodies that have all come out and said it's wonderful, safe and effective, repetition. But if you go back and look at the history, when the United States government, in the form of the Public Health Service, endorsed fluoridation in 1950, none of the trials that they'd begun in 1945 had been completed, and there was practically no science of the safety of either short-term or long-term effects of fluoride had been done.
Then why did they want to jump? Why did they want to jump into it in 1950 if they didn't have the trials yet that backed up doing it? What was the impetus to start putting fluoride in the water before they had a reason to put fluoride in the water?
Well, it's good, and there's been another whole book written on that, so we didn't have to spend too much time on the early history of fluoridation. But Chris Bryson, a former BBC correspondent, spent 10 years writing a book called The Fluoride Deception, explaining that history and how there were many industries that either used fluoride in their manufacturing or produced fluoride as a pollutant, who were faced with lawsuits from farmers whose farmland had been damaged by fluoride and a concern about what fluoride was doing to their workers every day. They saw in this practice a way of changing the image of fluoride, which in the 1940s was seen as the worst air pollutant out there, that had caused more damage to agriculture than any other air pollutant, and as I said, threatened many lawsuits. They saw this as a way of changing the image. And there was collusion. There was collusion between the U.S. Public Health Service and the Fluorine Lawyers Association. Those lawyers obviously were defending industry in lawsuits. So that's all been documented. So there's a huge economic interest, and also throw in the nuclear industry that used a huge amount of fluoride to make the atomic bomb and refine the fuel for the process.
Well, then maybe I need to ask. Let's just go over it. What is fluoride? I mean, what is it?
Well, fluoride is essentially any compound from the element fluorine. Now, fluorine is a very reactive element, and we're not talking about that. No one's putting fluorine into the drinking water, but they are putting a compound that either contains the fluoride ion or generates the fluoride ion when it goes into water. One example would be sodium fluoride. When sodium fluoride goes into water, then it separates into the sodium ions and the fluoride ions. And it's not the sodium ion that does anything, but the fluoride ion is what supposedly helps to reduce tooth decay. That's at least the theory. So it's the fluoride ion that we're talking about, which, again, going back to 15 years ago when I started looking at this, from a chemical point of view, fluoride is not very reactive chemically. I mean, fluorine is reactive, but fluoride is pretty benign from a chemical perspective. But the shocker is that it's extremely active biologically. It interferes with enzymes, interferes with G proteins, and goodness knows other things going on. A very nasty substance. You don't want it anywhere near your body tissues, nowhere near.
Then why do we want to put it in our toothpaste? What is it about fluoride applied topically to teeth that makes the teeth stronger and more resilient against tooth decay?
Well, the theory is, and from a chemical perspective, this seems quite reasonable. The theory is that the fluoride ion replaces the hydroxide ion in the mineral that makes up the teeth, the calcium hydroxyapatite. That's the mineral that makes up the teeth and the enamel and also the bones. And the fluoride gets in there. Once it's exchanged with this hydroxide ion, it makes the enamel stronger and more resistant to acid attack. And it's the acid attack from the acids which are generated when sugar is broken down in the mouth by bacteria. It's that acid which attacks our enamel. And so if you can stop it there, if you can make the enamel more resistant to acid attack, then you're going to fight tooth decay. Right. And when you've got fluoride in toothpaste at very high concentrations, 1,000 parts per million, 1,500 parts per million, you also inhibit the bacteria. You make the bacteria less able to survive in the mouth. So for toothpaste, there are two ways that you fight tooth decay. One, you get the fluoride into the enamel, and two, you fight the bacteria.
Okay, so I like that. Here's how I liken that to if I were back in the days when I used to drive beater cars, right? I would buy a car that had rust on it that would come that had a couple of bad winters. You know a little of that, I imagine, up around St. Lawrence University. You probably better. So you get some road salt on a car and it starts corroding at the metal. So you get out a good sander and then you use either like Bondo or you use fiberglass, and you patch up the quarter panel on the car so that it looks good as new. And that would be sort of like, as I'm hearing you describe it, maybe kind of the role that fluoride would have on my external, on my enamel and on my teeth, is that from the outside in, it helps to patch up where the like sugar has been corroding at the tooth on the exterior.
I think that's a good analogy. But the key thing to focus on, it's a topical effect. It works on the outside of the enamel.
I just want to make that, so that's what I'm saying. So that's why, then the other side of this, though, would be say, hey, look, see how we can patch up the hole on the quarter panel of the car by using Bondo or fiberglass kit that we get from our local, car body shop? Why don't we do this? Why don't we put the Bondo in the gasoline and then we pump it right into the gas tank, and then that'll patch up the holes from the inside? That would seem to be the problem with the fluoride on the inside. Would that be right?
I think that's a very, very good analogy. The one that we use a lot is that swallowing fluoride makes as much sense as swallowing suntan lotion, which is designed to the outside of the outside of the skin. And if you ask somebody to swallow suntan lotion, they would look at you a little strangely.
Right. But that's all right, that's even better. So then it's like so back in 1950 they thought, okay, well we got all this extra fluoride, got to find a place to put it. Why don't we rehabilitate fluoride's image and at the same time create a new market for something which otherwise would be expensive to get rid of, fluoride, and let's just convince people that it would be the same as swallowing suntan lotion and that it's be good for them. And if suntan lotion is good on the outside, well, of course it's good on the inside too. And yet there was no science yet available that said that that didn't work. Would that be fair?
That's right. That's absolutely right. They did not do the kind of studies that would be required, for instance, from the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. If you were bringing a new drug onto the market, the FDA would have to approve it, and that approving process would require randomized clinical trials to establish it was safe and effective. And that's never been done. The FDA has never submitted this substance or had companies submit this substance to randomized clinical trials. The official classification of fluoride by the FDA is it's an unapproved drug. It's amazing, isn't it? Over 60 years, we've put this stuff in our drinking water. It's probably the most prescribed medication in U.S. history, and yet the FDA, which is in charge of approving medicines, has never done this for fluoride.
Okay, and that idea of fluoride as a medicine, let's hang on to that thought for the moment because that's going to open up a whole other aspect of this conversation. But just to amplify it for people that are still catching on, then about what year was it when people started saying, hey, when are we ever going to have those studies that prove that this is actually good to put, fluoride is good to put in the water? Where was it that scientists began to say, wait a second, why are we doing this again? I mean, I know you didn't catch on, you said about, 17 years ago, but I mean, when did the movement start against fluoride?
Almost immediately.
Really?
Almost immediately. The first opponents of fluoridation were in Wisconsin. There were some dentists who were really pushing it like crazy in Wisconsin, and the first opponents were biochemists. And because those biochemists had used fluoride in their laboratory experiments to inhibit enzymes, it was a very good tool in biochemistry to find the metabolic pathways of how sugar was broken down in the body. And they often use poisons to block steps in the pathway to study those pathways. So biochemists had used fluoride to poison enzymes. They were horrified that anybody would add this deliberately to the bodily systems and put it in the drinking water. But their voices were drowned out by the dental community and those who had a huge self-interest in propelling this thing.
Well, so the dentists then, let's just say, they had their heart in the right place, and they said, well, look, fluoride's great in toothpaste on the outside. It must be. We don't have the science yet that proves it, but it must be good on the inside. So we'll just start putting it in there. And the idea was that they were going to stop tooth decay among people, say, who weren't inclined to use fluoride toothpaste or
fluoride toothpaste, that didn't come till later. The fluoride toothpaste actually didn't come for the 60s. In the beginning, they only had fluoride to put into the water. In the water.
So then the fluoride toothpaste comes along, which then, I grew up with fluoride toothpaste. I know of nothing has ever been in my toothpaste other than fluoride. And so when somebody said, well, they put fluoride in the water, I would have thought, well, fine, I'm already putting it in my mouth anyway. What is fluoridated water? Why is there any difference between me brushing my teeth with fluoride toothpaste and me drinking water with fluoride in it? I wouldn't have known the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And the fact that the very few countries, Ian, have succumbed to this practice. There's only 8 countries in the world that have more than 50% of their population drinking.
Really?
Yes. And yet, despite the fact that 98% of Europe, for example, is not fluoridated, you can't see a difference in tooth decay between a child that's grown up in fluoridated communities or a non-fluoridated community or countries. That's World Health Organization data. The World Health Organization tracks tooth decay in 12-year-olds.